Hello, great to have you with us again. Now, as always, it's been an extremely busy week in terms of tech, and this week is looking even busier. Reporting season is back with us. We have Intel and Alphabet, Google's parent, reporting this week. We also have IBM, and all eyes are going to be on them. Tell us more as to why everyone's paying attention to IBM so much this week, Alice.
Hi, Charlie. So it's been a pretty horrendous week for IBM, to say the least. Its share price plummeted by more than 25%, I think, on Tuesday. And that was because it released pretty weaker than expected preliminary results ahead of their actual earnings coming out on Wednesday. And I suppose, as you kind of mentioned, it kind of provided a bit of evidence that as companies spend more on AI, they're probably spending less on buying items or buying things from IBM, which maybe they had not anticipated. And I think obviously amid the chip shortage that there is as well, it was a pretty big shock. I believe the CEO kind of explained in a letter to shareholders that, you know, supply chains and a number of large deals that slipped through kind of had an impact. But it does kind of speak to maybe an indication of disruption in the software sector. That's a pretty big share price plummet.
Absolutely. I mean, we had the SaaS apocalypse obviously earlier this year, which is AI companies beginning to take a bite out of big companies like Workday, like IBM, like Salesforce, all of these big tech giants, if you like, and, you know, they're moving into that space. So I think that's kind of happening, that's having the impact here. But it's also, you know, Arvind Krishna, the CEO of IBM, also said himself, we faltered, we messed up, basically. Now, investors never like to hear that. It seems to be that they sort of didn't anticipate that their clients are rushing to buy memory chips, servers, and all of this ahead of, you know, the clampdown, if you like, in the market, which is the supply chain shortage in terms of chips. And they sort of missed they didn't anticipate that correctly, and they also didn't anticipate, I think, that a lot of the spending is moving away from them. So, you know, everyone's going to be looking, you know, I suppose they've softened the blow a bit, I guess, by telling everyone ahead of time, but there's going to be a huge amount of interest in their results this week. As I said, we've also got Intel and Alphabet announcing this week, and that's going to be followed in the next few weeks by all the guys you would be expecting, the Metas, the Microsofts, Amazon, Alphabet. It's going to be an interesting few weeks ahead to see where we're at in terms of whether the, you know, AI, is it still that the spend as mad as ever, or will it start to calm down a bit? So interesting time ahead.
Very interesting week. And also is also a big week actually this week, Charlie, for acquisition bids, if you like. I feel like we just recovered from the EasyJet Castle Lake Apollo news of the week, but this week we had Stripe. So obviously famously led by the Patrick and John Collison brothers. They have reportedly teamed up with Advent, which is a private equity firm, to buy the fintech pioneer, if you will, PayPal, at $53 billion, which is absolutely massive. Now, I think there has been reports of that before, that they were in talks, so it's maybe not necessarily the biggest surprise, but still a pretty massive bid. And I think the board of I think it was PayPal's board said it was not really something for them.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be, I mean, we first reported on it in February, I think it was, which was like, you know, that Stripe was circling, and it was all sort of like, what are they doing? Are they going to buy a little bit of it? Are they going to take over the whole thing? And everyone was like, that's quite a bolshy move from Stripe. They don't really play in that space. You know, they're very much in the merchant side of things rather than the consumer side. And it was like, really, that doesn't seem to fit. Would that make sense? And anyway, so, you know, it's become sort of, you know, no one still admitted it officially as yet.
Exactly.
But it, you know, it definitely seems to be, there's quite a number of reports saying this is happening. It seems to be they've put in, it sounds a good bid at the, you know, I can't remember what the asking price is. Is it 50 something million?
Yeah, huge.
Oh, that's it, $53 billion, which sounds a lot, and it is. It's up on the closing price from the day before, but it's actually considerably lower than PayPal has traded at in the past. And so unsurprisingly, PayPal has balked at the offer, kind of going, that's not really fair, you know.
Really,
and also they have apparently also said, look, we think there could be regulatory issues getting this deal across the line. I'm not so sure on that front, because as I say, they do play in a different space, you know what I mean? You know, Stripe has been more on the merchant side. The interesting thing is why they would want to buy PayPal. You know, I suggested an analysis last week that it's part of an AI land grab, you know, that it's really like, you know, I was at Stripe Sessions in San Francisco earlier in the year, where the Collisons were very much like, agentic AI is coming. It's going to be, your agents buying on your behalf. And how are they going to make those purchases? The wallets, PayPal owns Venmo. They're very much in the consumer space there.
Yeah.
If that becomes like the machinery, if you like, that's used to make those payments, then it makes perfect sense for Stripe to move into that space. And it could be a really, I described it as a cheeky bid. It very much is. But it puts PayPal into play. And I wouldn't really be surprised if other bidders come into the market, but you can totally see that this would be a really canny move for Stripe to move into that space. So I think it's going to be an interesting few months to see what emerges from that.
Exactly, keep our ears open. Charlie, you have a love a review around here. We have one nearly every week. You reviewed OneSonic. I know there's a brand that I've reviewed before.
Yeah.
But how did you kind of what were you reviewing first of all?
Yeah, I suppose let's start off with OneSonic because I really like the fact they're an Irish company.
Yeah.
And they're making Bluetooth speakers, they're making headphones. Now you reviewed the headphones and were very impressed from what I remember.
I did. They're the Studio Pros, and they've really, for the price point, like incredible competitor to the likes of like your Apple, Air Max, I think they're called, or AirPods. The more high end headphones like Sony, and I think that's kind of their whole model. I think they've actually said that themselves. They want to be that kind of less expensive version that like a normal consumer can spend on a pair of headphones, and it's not going to be hundreds and hundreds of euro. So I really liked it. Really good sound quality, really comfortable, and it took me by surprise actually. So I think they're going to keep growing. But I was pleasantly surprised personally with my headphones.
Yeah, but I've been I'll be doing a proper review of it for online shortly. But I've been testing the Mega Mouse 2. Oh. Mega Mouse 2 Bluetooth speaker that they have out, which is available at the moment for €60. It's usually €80, but I have to say, incredible. They're very cute. They're very short. They're like a sort of a mug size speaker, but the sound out of them is amazing. And for that sort of price, that's something you'd be expecting to pay. Probably I'd say double that at least, if not. I would put in the sort of 150 to 200 euro sort of category. So you are getting good bang for your buck there. I think it's an excellent product. And, it's always great to support something that's Irish. And particularly, they're very brave going into this space and taking on such big players, whether it's JBL, whether it's Bang & Olufsen. I mean, everyone is in that space.
It's a saturated market. So
and so, and they are going on, and it is with that thing of like, we are good quality, but at a lesser price. And you kind of go, fair play. I'm really impressed by that,
Brilliant. Fantastic. I think you also spoke to James Lawless, if that's correct.
That's right. Yeah, he was our big interview of the week. As I say in my intro, as you'll see soon enough, James is minister. His brief covers research and innovation, plus about 10 other things. So a great chat with James here, and we'll go to him shortly. I'm really pleased to be joined by James Lawless. You have possibly one of the longest titles in the world, James. You are the Minister for Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science. That's a fair old mouthful there.
That's quite a mouthful, and there's a lot going on.
Quite a big brief, yeah.
It is indeed, and a lot of it is lifelong learning, and I suppose I'm a great example of that myself, and maybe just tell you briefly my own background at the outset. So I studied mathematics, primary degree in math physics, did a master's degree in computer science, high performance computing, worked in that industry as a kind of consultant and in IT for about 10 years, systems analyst, and then did law by night. Got on my bike every evening after my office job, went down to King's Inns, studied for 4 years and became a barrister. Specialised in maritime law, did a little bit of intellectual property, tech law, GDPR as well, but primarily maritime law, just the way it fell. The guy I trained with, Darren Han, was specialist in that area. And then became a politician, and I'm now minister. And I suppose I'm really interested in the potential of technology and, to power the economy, to build societal resilience. And I suppose I'm a bit of a tech native because I have that kind of background. I won't claim to be down with the kids in terms of the latest and greatest technologies. My own
you're not continually on TikTok then, no?
No, my own kids continue to surprise me with all the different abilities and gadgets. But I suppose I have an appreciation of the power to change the world. And I always think as well that we shouldn't be afraid of change. We should embrace change. We should be adaptable. We should be responsive. I often quote Darwin, who said that the species that survives and thrives is not necessarily the strongest or the fastest, but the ones that are most adaptable to change coming at them. So, look, one of the things I've done in my ministry is it is a long title. I kind of structure under 3 pillars. HE, so HE, FE, and RNI. HE is higher education, universities, students, all that goes with that, student accommodation, campuses, campus life, all that good stuff. FE is further education. That is the traditional things like apprenticeships, our crafts, our construction skills, our hard hat and work boots, which are so critical to our big missions on housing, metros, ports, energy, all the big building projects we have set out under the National Development Plan. But also things like skills, which we're going to talk about now today, skilling, reskilling, digital skills, making sure we're up to speed in the modern workplace. And the third leg of the stool then is RNI, research and innovation. And I've invested significantly in that since becoming a minister. So I created, one of the first things I did was set up what we call the Inspire Research Fund. Sure. That's a 750 million envelope for research infrastructure. And that's available to every college in Ireland. I encourage partnership with industry, if they can find an enterprise partner as well, and to build out their capacity to do world-leading research. And it's across all disciplines. It's right from STEM through the arts to the creative industries. But really allowing them to build, it's building an ecosystem. So it's not necessarily funding particular projects, although we do that as well. But it's actually saying, here are the labs, the libraries, the equipment, the supercomputers in some cases, whatever it is, the biobanks. Here are the tools you need to do world-class research in Ireland. And I've coupled that with investing in talent. So I put out last year, one of the first things I did as well, we called it the Global Talent Call. And I put out an antenna and said, look, if you want to come to Ireland, if you're doing world-leading research, and these people are stars typically, they can bring people with them, they can attract other sort of momentum around them, and we've had a really good response to that. So of course, we have some wonderful people already here in the system. Sure. So building out the talent pipeline, putting money into infrastructure, and then we have Research Ireland and things like the Ring Centres, and I launched another 7 of those just 2 weeks ago, another $500 million investment in that. So I suppose really I've put a lot of funding into the research space, and that's funding that isn't demonstrably, there's no immediate return on that. Yeah. And sometimes politically it can be hard to make the argument to say, I want to do something and take a big chunk of money from the annual budget that we mightn't see the return on for 20 years.
Absolutely. And that can be a very hard sell.
We all know, look, politicians live and die in electric cycles. Okay, we all get that. So at the same time, I think strongly, and the Taoiseach very much supports me, this is how we build out for the future. This is how we get the economy of tomorrow. This is how we get the society, whether that's, it can be developing the latest microchips, semiconductor technology. It could be, how do we manage data centres in terms of the storage footprint and energy usage? But it can also be Dublin's traffic modelling. How do we get a better railway crisscrossing the city? Another hobby horse of mine. How do we get life sciences? How do we build the next drug and actually to deliver those to patients in a timely, sensitive fashion? So it's societal responses. It's economic powerhouse. We have been a country that has leapfrogged many stages in the Industrial Revolution. Like I always say, we went from making potato chips to making microchips in the space of about 2 generations. Yeah. From a Mali-free education, the mass FDI, all of a sudden, and it was through knowledge. It was through investment. Like we didn't have really fossil fuels to speak of, or big industrial heartlands. We didn't have a Rhine Valley or north of England. What we had was people that were ripe at the time, coming out of a sort of agrarian primitive society, post-revolution, post-independence, kind of finding our feet as a nation. And we invested heavily in skills and education. And that started to really come good. And kind of when the Celtic Tiger started to roar, and even just before, like I remember coming out of college, so I did maths, computer science. Intel came to town. Intel came to do what we used to call the milk round and presented I was in Trinity. They came to, I think it was the Montclair Hotel. And we were kind of blinking into the sunlight in the late 90s, and they were like, actually, Ireland is really primed to tear ahead. You've got an educated workforce, you're in Europe, you're English speaking, and you have a significant investment in education. And we were like, wow, okay, Ireland is taking its place amongst the nations of the world. So I guess that's the tradition I'm very much see myself and obviously investing in that.
Yeah, and obviously we're known now for that, in terms of our education, for the fact that we've so many tech companies here, both indigenous ones that are flying, and then obviously the big multinationals, the Intels, the Metas, Googles and so on. You under your brief, one of the key things that you've been pushing, particularly of late, is skilling, which we've already touched on. How important is that in an era in which AI is becoming dominant?
Yeah, so look, I think that conversely, the advent of AI in many ways, the response is actually to go back to basics. So yes, of course, we should all be, as much as possible, digital adapters and digital natives. And we have things like the AIready.ie website, which is a government response to sort of digital familiarization. But actually what we're finding, and I've just come from a roundtable event I hosted with professional services today. I'm bringing industry around the table with the training agencies once a month and saying, for different sectors, what are the training gaps? What are the training needs? So one of the things that come up today, for example, is that people who have worked in a retail environment, or students that have done a shift behind a bar or on the local supermarket, actually have a better skill set than someone that maybe did a very deep academic dive somewhere else, because they have that real world ability to communicate and to engage. And also, someone else was saying to me recently that it's harder to get, I'm going to say kids, but the younger people coming out to do sales jobs, because it requires a certain pushiness or a certain, confidence and to get maybe in someone's face in a nice way, and so say, try to drive home the deal. So some of those, what we might call soft skills, because you have such a digital competency now in our youth, some of the traditional soft skills maybe being a little bit left behind.
Sure.
I think COVID didn't help that. People are in their rooms, they're on smartphones. And that permeates everything, even in student accommodation. I'm trying to encourage more shared spaces, shared living spaces, so students come out and talk to each other and get to know each other. And I think regardless of the discipline, whether you're studying microbiology, whether you're studying psychotherapy, whether you're studying ancient Rome, I think you should join student societies, you should get involved in debating, you should maybe write for a college paper, hang out with students from the other side of the campus, and actually, ideally, even take an elective module in another department within the college, because then you will have someone, actually, it's less important what they studied. It's more important what skills did they get along the way.
Sure.
Can they work on a team? Can they clearly and confidently communicate? Can they engage in a negotiation? Can they have that kind of out of the box? Like one of the things we talked about at the roundtables as well was ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, all the different, there's many different tools out there, regardless which one you choose. If I put that into an engine and sort of pull up a query, which I do probably every day for different things, I kind of have a yardstick, from prior learning or just life experience. Sounds right, sounds wrong. No, I'll always validate it anyway, especially for anything serious. But you sort of have an instinct. But if you're going at that and that's all you've ever known, you may miss that sort of critical thinking to be able to say, does this instinctively sound right? So actually, in a way, in an age of AI, it's more important than ever to double down on the classical education, all those things I just talked about, and take things that are not necessarily commercially, take your degree in ancient Rome, take your sub-Saharan African geography class,
Finally, my arts degree comes good for me.
You can never go wrong with studying history, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And tell me, in terms of, so we're talking about, I suppose, skilling of people generally in terms of making them AI savvy. Yeah. And beyond that, though, where are we at in terms of, where our startups are at, where, AI is Ireland AI ready rather than just, our citizens?
Yeah. So, look, I suppose we've had a number of leaps forward in the last couple of months in that. So I've invested part of that research budget. I'm purchasing a new supercomputer, which is under procurement at the moment. iCheck, which is run at the University of Galway, are leading the initiative on that. We also have joined what's called the AI Antenna, which is a partnership with France and Luxembourg. We launched this there last week. Actually, the first event of the presidency in the morning of 1st of July with the Luxembourg and French ambassadors president. And that's really exciting. That gives Irish researchers and AI technologists, including the likes of Dogpatch, many of the kind of commercial startup spaces, as well as the academics, access to a real high-powered machine, which is physically located in France, but actually we're plugging into it. There's the AI Gigafactory, which is a similar initiative, taking that to the next level. And we will continue, and we will have AI computing power here. We will have machines here. We're buying the supercomputer. We'll be buying a quantum computer. We're getting up to, in terms of the public ownership. But as well as that, we have the access to those machines on a European stage, globally, and we're part of that Europe. And this goes back in some ways to digital sovereignty. So I think that we shouldn't be isolationist. Yeah. We shouldn't say we're going to lock down, we're going to put up Team Fortress Europe and we're not going to allow in Chinese or American, technology. But we should have our own abilities and our own competencies. And by playing our part in European initiatives like the supercomputer, like the AI Antenna, like the Gigafactories, Ireland is very much working, being part of that wider European initiative. So that things, if we end up in a situation where we have our own data, we have our own hardware, we have our own software, we have our own expertise, and that's never a bad thing. And I think I absolutely think that technology advances when we collaborate. And I think we shouldn't be sort of narrow-minded about it, but we should certainly have our own competencies. We shouldn't be dependent. I mean, what happens if a server goes down in the States or any other part of the world, or there's a change in the law, or there's a geopolitical movement, and all of a sudden we're exposed? If we have access to our own kit and competencies, I think it insulates us, and it allows us play our part and have, like, so in quantum, for example. And there's a lot of talk about Europe falling behind, maybe because too heavy regulation and all that, and I sympathise with a lot of those arguments, dragging letter reports about trying to deregulate and simplify, and I totally subscribe to that, as does Minister Chambers. We're working to accelerating infrastructure and lots of other things there. But actually, quantum is an area we're not behind in. Europe is at the lead point. Europe is ahead of the race in quantum, certainly, tying with the other big powers.
And I suppose even in Ireland, we've got great companies like Equal One, which is doing so well. And
I was over in Japan last year. I did a research mission to Japan and Singapore. I was in a room with the world's leading scientists in quantum in Japan. And they said, of course, the one we're all watching is Equal One. Irish company, really proud moment. They have, of course, the Riken supercomputer there, which is, I think, the world's largest. And no, it is always, it changes nearly daily. Singapore, amazing investment in infrastructure in terms of research potential. And again, I've taken a lot of those kind of best in breed ideas home and plugged them into our ecosystem and how we're doing that. But we're investing heavily in quantum now. We've joined the European Quantum Pact. And again, that gives our researchers access. And on another slightly different note, within 100 days of me becoming minister, I'd sign us up to CERN in Geneva. It was kind of a lifelong ambition. With the maths physics background, I was aware of what they did. And I always thought it was a crying shame we weren't in that club, and we are now. And that gives, in the area of particle physics, but so much more, ancillary services. It is about the reactions and exploding tiny particles inside the chamber. But actually, it's also engineering, it's also data crunching, it's also large mass models. And those kind of experiments, as always in science, have multiple applications in really unexpected ways. So I'm determined Ireland will be part of every club going in terms of, collaborating and the best of science, best of technology. We'll have access to leading kit, to leading infrastructure. We'll make sure our talent is supported to drive that out. And, I think that's where we need to be. As I say, it's not something that's going to come good tomorrow or the next day, probably not before the next election, but it's actually building a legacy. Where's Ireland going in the next generation, next couple of generations? And I think it will bear fruit in the long term.
And it's interesting to hear you say, I'm just aware of the time, but it's interesting to hear you say about, that, you sound quite optimistic about the opportunities that are there, given, it's interesting that you say that given that there's a lot of negativity about, potential job disruption, all of this sort of thing. Do you greet the future warmly? I mean, do you think there's huge opportunities for Ireland?
So like one of the kind of talking points of late has been that AI is going to disrupt graduate recruitment and it was interesting that at the professional services roundtable, that was one of the themes I expected to get into. Some of the firms around the room said actually they're recruiting more than ever, which surprised me. But they said that they expect their graduate entry to be AI competent. And in many ways, like there was a comparison made when the Excel spreadsheet went mainstream maybe 20, 25 years ago. There was many predictions for the demise of accountants. We won't need them anymore. Now, I think there's more accountancy firms than ever. But actually, they're doing more strategic value add. They moved up the chain. I think that's what we're going to see here as well. And the other point that's often made is, everybody agrees that to have strategic direction setting and leadership in an organization, you need the grey hairs, right? So you need the people that have been around the block a few times. If you don't take in graduates and give them 20 years of learning and getting things wrong sometimes and correcting course and responding, you never get to those people that have that experience, those veterans. So you kind of have to look where and I think that I think AI and computer technology in general should be regarded as a productivity aid, something that can enhance our economic response, our strategic response. But it doesn't substitute, in my opinion, for that human judgment call and the ability to be agile, to be responsive, to think quickly, to assess a set of facts and say, well, instinctively, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't, this isn't where I think we should go. And also to be mindful of sometimes conflicting. So clients might want to protect their outcome, or regulatory body might want to protect their outcome. There could be a PR or advertising campaign coming up that so in business, it's not always a straight line. Sometimes there's many competing demands, and there's that sort of judgment call. So I think that so I am optimistic. I am, and I think that Ireland has adapted really well historically, we had huge change, like Celtic Tiger Ireland, the crash back out again, kind of a digital tiger now, if I can call it that. And that's going from strength to strength. And yes, there's uncertainties. People are always afraid of change, and people are always afraid of the future. So that's one of the reasons that I'm out there doing the roundtables, talking to industry, also talking to the universities, talking to the training agencies, and seeing can we provide enough support into the system. So one of the things we're doing recently is these microcredits. So I'm subsidising employers to release people for training. We're giving subsidised courses, and the courses that you can draw down in work, out of work. You can do it in the evening, do it on the weekend, do it online. So I do whatever way it suits you. There's a very much blended learning offerings, and there to get people up to speed in work. Sure. And one of the points that was made recently to me as well is that, okay, whatever their retirement age is, whether it's 60, 65, whatever, 66, that gets talked about a lot. But actually, today's school leavers could well be productively when they're 100. Like these people are not, aging is being pushed back as well. So the job for life is well gone, but actually you might have multiple jobs, you have multiple paths, and that's why going to do a 4-year course at the age of 18, and that's your bit of paper that carries you the rest of your life is long gone. It's actually about refreshing, checking back in, and as I've done, change path. I've been, an IT professional. I've been a barrister. Now I'm a politician. I hope I have many more.
Who knows what's next
of me? Exactly. And I'll certainly be availing of lifelong learning as long as I can.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks for that, James. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
And now that was great to chat with James there. And now we are going to finish off, as always, with one more thing. What do you have for us this week, Alice?
So Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella has issued a warning to companies about AI, and I feel like it's bad for the tech giants are issuing warnings about AI when they integrate it into almost everything. He was saying companies are effectively paying for AI twice, that once financially with money, and then again by kind of revealing knowledge or information that, and he was kind of saying in as TechCrunch reported, which is an online newspaper, his solution was the kind of thing that maybe the CEO of a giant cloud provider would say. He said companies should retain ownership of their data, so he's urged them to build their own proprietary learning environments on the cloud. Now obviously Microsoft has its own cloud, Azure and everything like that, so there's a bit of irony there to it, but it's obviously a pretty big warning. Like I say, the fact that when it comes from such a company that really instills AI into a lot of products. Last week we were talking about how I was reviewing the Surface Pro, Copilot was really integrated into everything. It's a pretty massive warning shock, I think, and I think it just kind of speaks to, now will companies take it on? I don't know, but I think it was a pretty big bit of news across this week.
I think it's sort of something that we already know to an extent, which is like, obviously we are paying for the product itself, which is, whether it's ChatGPT, Anthropic's Claude, whatever it might be, but we're also using we're also paying for the fact that we are giving away our data, as we have done with, with the over the years with social media. If it's free, it's never free because you're giving away something, and that's happening here as well. So not only are we paying for it, but we're also paying in terms of giving the data away, giving very important information away to others that are using it. And you're seeing the likes of Anthropic, OpenAI using that, the data that they get in a similar way that Amazon does. It gets information about products and then kind of goes, hold on, we could put out a product that's in this space, and that's, I think, is the big fear, is like, are you suddenly giving away all this really valuable information that will then be used against you with something coming out that's going to completely undercut you? So I think it's, I'm suspicious as to Nadella's reasons for saying this, because obviously Microsoft is busy in that space itself and has a huge stake in OpenAI, which I know has weakened in recent years, but I'm still slightly suspicious as to his reasons for it, but it's good for him to draw our attention to it anyway.
Exactly.
So
I think it's more attention than anything else. As you say, it's something that we probably know already, but it's more of a stark reminder. Whether it will fall on deaf ears or not remains to be seen. But yeah, I thought it was an interesting line from kind of the higher ups in tech giants.
All right, well, come here. We will leave it there. Thanks again for joining us, Alice, and thanks again to you, listeners, for tuning in. And we will be back if you want to make contact with us. Let us know what you think of the show and what we should feature. Give us a shout on connected@businesspost.ie, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Thank you.